The Olympics are not just about sports. The Olympics are about everything. They provide us an opportunity to talk about everything. You know, there was a journalist named William Oscar Johnson who once wrote this about the Olympic Games. To write properly about the Olympic Games of the 20th century is to write about almost everything in the 20th century, about plastics and politics and racism and the demise of the rigid Bible morality and the rise of situation ethics, about avarice and airplanes and vitamin pills and chauvinism and free love and selling refrigerators on television and urban renewal and electricity. So I teach a course here at UNC Chapel Hill. I teach a number of courses that use sports to explore American culture and global politics. And the relevant course that I teach here is titled The Olympic Games, a Global History. And I absolutely love teaching this course. It's my favorite course to teach. And the students seem to love it as well. Actually, the student newspaper has more than once named it the best course at UNC. And I like to think that I have something to do with that, and I'll pat myself on the back. But I also know that the students love this course because they get to learn about everything, or at least they learn a little bit about many things. So that's what I want to do today. I want to use the Olympic Games to explore many of the significant storylines out there in 20th and 21st century global culture. You know, the Olympics, you may not realize this, but let's think about what the Olympics are. The Olympics are the largest regularly scheduled international event in the world. Not sporting event, but they are the largest regularly scheduled international event in the world. And as such, the Olympic Games are a major political showcase. How did that happen? You know, how did they become this? Well, I'm going to tell you that story first. The story begins with this man. The modern Olympic Games were created in 1894 through the efforts of a minor member of the French nobility, a man named Baron Pierre de Coubertin. And Coubertin created the modern Olympic Games in 1894, though it's really more precise to say that he revived the ancient Olympic Games. What we now call the ancient Olympic Games, they began in 776 BC. They ran to 393 AD, or BCE and CE. They occurred every 4 years without exception, a mind-boggling run of 1,200 years. But then they went away. They were destroyed by the Christian Roman emperors who were troubled by the game's pagan attributes, not to mention the fact that the athletes at the ancient Olympic Games, they completed totally naked with their bodies slathered in olive oil. That's a different story for a different lecture. Let's stay in the 1890s. The modern Olympic movement then, it was created in 1894 through the energies of Pierre de Coubertin. That's him there, second from the right, standing up. And Coubertin was a French physical educator who became obsessed with the idea of using sports to promote international cooperation throughout the world. Although when he said the world, he was mainly thinking Europe. He wanted to use sports to bring nations together. He wanted to use sports to heal the past wounds from past wars. So in 1894, Coubertin invited dozens of men to attend a congress at the Sorbonne in Paris. It's called a Congress on the Revival of the Olympic Games. This is when and where the modern Olympic movement is going to be born. And Coubertin, he was in charge. He gave a lengthy speech. He told the men there of his plan to create a great international athletic festival, one that would happen every 4 years, just like the ancient Olympic Games, and one that would revolve among the great international capitals of the world. And the idea behind this was this: men, and it was all men at first, men who play sports with each other, no matter their differences. Coubertin believed that they would develop a healthy understanding and camaraderie and respect for each other. This is the idea of Olympism, the idea of international understanding through sports. It's the central idea of the Olympic Games. It's what Coubertin called Olympism. Competition in sports, it breeds mutual respect and understanding. It will prevent future wars. Olympism. So why not, right? It's worth a shot. Let's try this. I mean, the late 19th century was filled with European wars. Coubertin is trying to stop this. But then at that very same Congress, Coubertin and the other members of the organization that he created, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, they made an interesting decision. And it was a decision that led to a tension, I think, at the Olympic Games, to a paradox, we might say, at the Olympic Games. Coubertin and the organization that he created, they decided that individuals could not compete in the Olympics as individuals. They had to compete as representatives of nations. They had to represent and wear a flag. And so let's think about this. You know, Coubertin created the games to ease global tensions. But by ruling that athletes had to participate as representatives of nations, one could argue that what the games do, they don't bring international harmony. What they do is they feed off existing international tensions. They may even exacerbate those tensions. I think I gave you a pretty good example of that at the start of this lecture. Think about what we do when we watch the Olympic Games. I know we all interact with sports differently, but I know many people root for their nation and thus against other nations. That's not what Olympism is supposed to be. So think for a minute how different the Olympics would be if athletes competed as individuals rather than as people tethered to national identities. You know, what if the Olympics ignored the idea of nationalism rather than reinforced the idea of nationalism, which, you know, after all, is the idea that everyone from one nation is the same and they're different from everyone else around the world. In my Olympics history course here at UNC Chapel Hill, it drives my students nuts. I like to play a game with my students. I say, I submit for the sake of argument that the Olympics would be better. They would be more pure and more in line with Coubertin's original intent if the games countered the idea of nationalism. They would be better if athletes competed as individuals rather than as representatives of nations. And I ask them to think about it. You know, I say, what if instead of the Olympic Parade of Nations, where athletes march out in their national colors and waving a flag as representatives of nations, what if instead of this, there was the Parade of Athletes, where the athletes of the world, they came out one by one, but divided up by sport. You know, here come the shot putters together. Here come the swimmers together. Here come the gymnasts together. Yeah. I think that would be pretty cool. All these different body types sort of lumped together by sport. But more to my point, this would be a statement of athletic togetherness. You know, regardless of where one is born, we're all the same. Now, whenever I make this suggestion to my students, they look at me as if I am crazy. They like the national identities. It gives them immediate rooting interest. But that's the point. When you root for someone just because they're from your nation, you are rooting against someone just because they are not from your nation. And look, there is no doubt in my mind that this insistence on nationalism at the Games, that it increases interest in the Olympic Games. But hey, you know, wars are interesting too, right? All right, cheap shot, but I'm sure you get my point by now. Sports are interesting on their own. The Olympic Games, the athletic competitions, I think are interesting on their own, but it's the pull and the power of nationalism that makes them really interesting. The Olympic Games work as well as they do. They are as big as they are because, and let's think about this, they indulge precisely what they say they are trying to transcend, our basest instinct for tribalism.